Welcome everyone to the annual Michel Halpérin Memorial event. My name is Tami Mund and I am BGU's legal counsel, and I'm honored and excited. The Halpérin family relationship with Ben-Gurion University of the Negev goes back more than 30 years and spans 3 generations. Michel Halpérin headed the Swiss Associates of BGU for more than 25 years until his death in 2014. He was preceded by his father, Vladimir, who founded the organization, and now his son, Lionel, has taken up the mantle. Esther Halpérin has been throughout the years a devoted champion of education and social impact at BGU, and as of last night, is a brand new honorary doctor from Ben-Gurion University. The Halpérin family's generosity and foresight have been a boon throughout the years in addressing the various needs of the university and its students. They have brought to life initiatives that truly make a difference. Examples of their many contributions to the BGU community include the Esther and Michel Halpérin Student Center at Sde Boker, the Michel Halpérin Chair in Global Law and Policy, and most notably, the Keren Moshe Leadership Training Program, which Esther and Michel founded 24 years ago. The program provides hundreds of motivated and deserving students with generous scholarships in exchange for community service and leadership training. Michel Halpérin was a passionate supporter of social justice, both in his legal practice and as a leader of the Liberal Party in Grand Council of Geneva, as well as chair of the Geneva Bar Association. He was a role model for many young professionals, and BGU is honored to commemorate him with this annual event. This year's recipient of the Michel Halpérin Memorial Prize is Professor Effie Shoham Steiner from the Department of Jewish History, who is recognized for his research on law and justice. Unfortunately, he is unable to be with us today. And now for the main event, an enlightening and timely discussion on the relationship between executive and judiciary branches of government in Israel. I'm honored to invite another of our honorary doctorate recipient, Justice Professor Elyakim Rubinstein, former Deputy President of Israel's Supreme Court, and also former Secretary of Government and former Attorney General, to join me. We celebrated, do you hear me? We celebrated the 75th Independence Day of the State of Israel about a month ago. What is the State of Israel for you? What's the role of the Negev today and in the future in your eyes?
Well, old rabbis used to say when they begin a sermon, they used to say, before I speak, I'll say a few words. So, first, let me first thank the Halpérin family for the generosity, and thank Ben-Gurion University, of course, for bestowing upon me the honor yesterday. By the way, there's a story about President Reagan, who came to visit the Alcatraz prison near LA, near San Francisco, sorry, and he had to address the inmates, and he didn't know how to open up his remarks, so he said, I'm glad you're all here. and I heard the interesting dialogue between Professor Gross and Professor Elimelech, and Professor Elimelech said that maybe in some of the research areas you should study liberal arts, not only engineering and so on. Reminded me there was a famous Jewish justice of the US Supreme Court, Justice Frankfurter, And there's a famous story that a kid of 12 wrote him a letter asking him how he could become a Supreme Court justice. And the answer was study history, study literature, study general liberal arts, then come to the law, because you need to have this intellectual and mental basis for whatever you'll do with history and literature and so on. And you spoke about, I'm saying to Professor Elimelech, you spoke about wastewater and so on. 40 years ago, exactly, I think, I was the chair of our delegation to the Treaty of Peace with Jordan. But 10 years earlier, I was involved in a contact through the US to try to prevent Jordan, diplomatically, of course, from building its sewage in a way that all the nice odor, the smell, will go to the hotels of Eilat. Just imagine you sitting on the balcony and smelling that. And so we had to work through the US, and for a while, somebody from the embassy told me, all our traffic of cables at the time, as it was, is just on the sewage of Aqaba. But finally it was solved, however, some years, and some years after that, maybe a decade after that, we had the peace treaty with Jordan. I remember coming once to the King Hussein, was the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and we had this attempt to kill the Hamas, the leader, what was his name? Khaled Mashal, and escaped my mind. And we had to pacify the king, and I was sitting with him, and it's the only time I knew him many, many years, and confidentially and public and so on. He had a good, kind of a good-natured personality. But this time he said, why? And this stuck into my mind. So it's time to answer your question. I'm very proud of the state of Israel and of having served it for over 50 years. It's, if I compare our fate as a nation just before that, the Holocaust, and my own family history includes that, and the state of Jews everywhere. Now, I don't say Israel is perfect, but if I compare it now, including Ben-Gurion University, to what existed when I was a child in the 50s and growing up in the early 60s, it's a totally different country, you know, in terms of science, in terms of medicine, in terms of technology, in terms of just name it. Who knew about high-tech? Who knew about television? But I grew up in Givatayim, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv. In our street, not a very short street, there were two cars, a cab and an army officer. That was it. Now, when I come to my brother who lives there, I can, if he doesn't open his parking, I can roam around for 20 minutes. So life has changed. And I don't say we are perfect. In fact, we are very imperfect. But and what's happening now in the judiciary story and so on is an evidence for that. But it is a miracle, the miracle of the Jewish statehood, the miracle of the ingathering of the exiles. I'm sure in this audience there are people from I don't know how many scores of countries. Take our own extended family. There are, of course, the original Russian, Polish, whatever, but around it, Turkish, Iraqi, Moroccan, Kurdish, and so on, Libyan Jews, and French, American. What I'm trying to say is that this ingathering of the exile and what happened here in terms of the merging is Hebrew language is a miracle. You know, there was an Israeli writer, Kishon, who used to say that here's the only country where the mothers learn the mother tongue from the children. And indeed, when I was growing up, you heard, I remember a kid in my class, we were playing, and his mother called him up to come back home in Hungarian. And he yelled at her, "If I ever hear Hungarian again, I will never come again, I'll never come home, I'll never this." And as far as Hungarian goes, I think he was right, but seriously speaking, no offense to Hungary, of course, but it's a miracle, and so and I'm very happy to be here in Ben-Gurion because I had a little finger in the establishing the university as Ben-Gurion University instead of the Negev University as it was called then. I was one of the people involved in executing Ben-Gurion's estate, and there were a number of things that we dealt with at the time, and then the Ben-Gurion law, which was passed, and some of the negotiations of that. So for me, when the President Khaimovich called me and said they're honoring me with this honorary degree, I told him, "You don't know why you're honoring me. You're honoring me because in 1976 or what I was involved in this effort. But it's a great country, so we should be proud of that. And our real problems are the internal unity, and it doesn't have to be artificial. It's not that every secular person from Tel Aviv should get up every morning and embrace a Haredi person from Bnei Brak or something like that. It is the knowledge that we have the same fate for the Nazis. They couldn't care less whether you were a liberal Jew from Berlin who never goes to a synagogue, or a Hasidic Jew from Warsaw that is dressed in the Hasidic garb and so on. And the notion that, thank God, after 2,000 years we have our own state. What a great thing. And this is something which is lacking to a great extent and shouldn't lack, because it's our future. And the other thing is, you asked about the Negev, and I can't say I'm an expert on the Negev, although my daughter is a graduate of this university, but all I can say is that it's obvious that the vision that Ben-Gurion had to come here to a poor kibbutz in 1953 or so, and at the age of whatever he was, close to 70, and be here to be an example to young people that they should do the same. And also, I was involved in the treaty with Jordan in the Arava area very heavily. And the Arava is not exactly the Negev, but it's sociologically and in many respects it is. And in that area, I met people who came there in the late 50s, encouraged by Ben-Gurion in Yahav to Vatat to establish moshavim, kibbutzim, agricultural villages there. And at the time, it's not what you have now. You couldn't thrive that way. You couldn't get to Eilat. What was Eilat? I was there first in my high school. It was a poor little, I can call it almost a village. And so the Negev must have its great future, and I hope one day there'll be trains will go further than Beersheba to all the area. Okay, I think I spoke. And by the way, our sages say, "Harotze sheyachkim yadrim." Whoever wants to be smart should go south. And whoever wants to be rich should go north. So I don't know what is smart in this respect, but really one who wants to be smart or to be a sage should go south. So you should put it on the emblem of the university. Well.
Thank you. Elyakim Rubinstein's book opened with an article by Aviada Cohen, "The Peacemaker, Lines for the Character of a Human, Jewish, and Zionist Judge." Tell us about peacemaking, both in your roles as part of the Camp David talks and the peace talks with Jordan, the Palestinians, and Lebanon, and as a judicial worldview.
Well, first of all, it was a real privilege to be able, I thank the Almighty for being able to participate in peace talks, basically with all our neighbors all around. And there were milestones that were success, or at least a reasonable success, and there were milestones which were lesser success. Today is May 17. May 17, 1983, we signed an agreement with Lebanon, which is forgotten now because it didn't take off as Syria torpedoed it. But we took it seriously at the time, and for 6 months we negotiated with them on an agreement which was 1 degree less than a peace treaty, but included both security and civil or civilian elements. And it was signed in Kiryat Shmona and in Chalde near Beirut, where we used to negotiate one session here, one session there. And I was hopeful, I was then the legal advisor of the foreign ministry, and we worked on it, that something will come out of it. And the Lebanese lost more than we by having this just frozen and sent to the archives of history. I mentioned that first because today is its 40th anniversary, but nobody remembers it. I mentioned it in the newspaper yesterday, just as a kind of a footnote. But Egypt, Camp David, it was on the video that they had last night with me. They mentioned that for me, to this very day, a most moving moment is being at the airport welcoming President Sadat. Some of you may have seen it on television. I wasn't supposed to be there by my protocol rank, but Moshe Dayan, whose assistant I was at the time, called me at the early hours of the evening and said, "Would you like to join?" I said, "Nachesh," in Hebrew, guess. And I joined him, and really there's this kind of, they used the term wings of history. That plane was wings of history because this was something new. Nobody thought 10 days earlier, although we had contacts with Egypt through Morocco and so on, that Sadat will land in Israel. And Begin and Sadat, our prime minister, were different people. But the one thing was in common, they liked drama. So once Begin understood that Sadat is serious, 2-3 days after his famous speech at the time, Begin sent him a very ceremonial invitation and so on, and he was here. And of course, he didn't finish the story because, sometimes you have the big picture, but then the devil, they say, is in the details, and the details took. And then President Carter, who I criticized for many of his pronouncements over the years later, but nobody can take from him the credit of Camp David of September 78. We were there were 12 Israelis, the delegation. Unfortunately, we are now only 2 that are alive, President Barak, Justice Barak, and myself. And Barak fulfilled an important role there that people forget. And we came out, which we didn't proceed thinking. We didn't think it was going to happen. When we entered there, we didn't think it was going to happen, and it did happen. And we came out after Begin used to say, 13 days and 13 nights. It was 13 days and 12 nights, but but who counts? And we came out, and Begin needed a lot of courage. He had there 2 ministers, Dayan, who contributed many ideas, and there was Weizmann, who contributed a good atmosphere with the Egyptians, and other officials. But the decision was made by Begin at the end of the day, and it was very difficult. We don't have the time to go into that. I was later privileged, as I said before, to head our delegation to the Treaty of Peace with Jordan. Began with Prime Minister Shamir after Madrid. It then continued mainly with Prime Minister Rabin. And Prime Minister Rabin was very keen on the peace with Jordan. He had good relations with the king historically, but this time it was open, and I'm a great believer in personal relations. If you have good personal relations, you have confidence. If you have confidence, you can achieve results. And one word I'd like to mention in that respect is respect. That is, the other side should understand that you respect them, and you should expect to be respected. And I'm saying it from experience. And the Jordanian was a good example. Our main challenge, besides security issues, water issues, which were desalination and all of that, but the main practical issues for the moment was the Arava villages that after the late 60s were permitted by all Israeli governments to work lands east of what used to be the armistice line. That is, that on the eve of the treaty, 50% of the worked land of the Arava villages was on the other side of the armistice line, which was not a boundary. And we had to find a creative solution to get that into a treaty of peace. And because of the confidence between the leaders and the confidence between the delegations, which we worked on for a couple of years, we could achieve a solution which was an exchange of land that one-on-one, 40 square kilometers, which is a lot, to get, besides one village, so far as a story which we don't have the time for, all the land that was worked by our villages all entered the sovereignty of the State of Israel with milestones and with boundary stones and so on. And this made everybody happy. And the other side could tell the other that we got the same amount of land. Of course, the difference was that this is worked land, this is some kind of another land. So it's very, very, I'd say, fulfilling to participate in this kind. There were also, disappointments with the Palestinians, with the Lebanese I mentioned, with the Syrians, which was the most difficult and most unpleasant negotiations I took part in. But here we are, and what was a dream before 77, 30 years of the State of Israel, is now a reality that with 2 important countries, the biggest country and the longest boundary country, we have a peace. It's not the ideal peace from the civilian point of view, but it's there.
You were the Attorney General. What is your opinion on the issue of splitting the role of the Attorney General?
The short answer is I'm against. The longer answer is that, first of all, it also goes to the things we now have with the judiciary and so on. If it's not broken, why fix it? Of course, historically, we could shape or carve another model of the Attorney General. We carved it, and I say we because speaking of former generations in the early years of the state, we carved it in a way that has a lot of powers. It is the legal advisor to the government. He or she, now she, is the head of the prosecution, representation of the government. This is something which is really not easy to grasp. But it works, and I was for 7 years the attorney. Of course, I had a lot of criticism, and everybody, you're an easy target for criticism, and I had a lot of it. But the bottom line is that the people who did the job, and I won't speak of myself, of course, had the integrity and the ability professionally to do it. Those who propose, you should know, those who propose to split it don't want just the new model. They want to weaken the institution. And those who want now to change the story with the court want to weaken the institution. It's not just, a nice, better architectural arrangement. No. So, we don't have the time, but I could explain at length why I'm against. Without, one thing I should say, every Attorney General has to be modest. You have to have humility, modesty, so to know that with all the powers that you have, you may, like every human being, make mistakes. So be moderate, be reasonable. But having said that, I'm against splitting.
You wrote hundreds of judgments. I chose 4. Your last one is regarding the rights of prisoners in jails. I would like you to tell about it, and also if you may tell us about your opinion about the Hebrew law in the Israeli legal system.
Well, thank you. But I shouldn't forget something. We just visited the archives, Ben-Gurion's archives. That person was keen on writing his diary every day. And I remember, and I think I heard it from my good friend Chaim Israeli from the Ministry of Defense. Ben-Gurion, when he came here in 1906, was 20. Who was he? A young immigrant that went to work as a farmer. He wrote to his father in Poland, keep my letters that I'm writing to you, because I have to know what I thought about Eretz Israel, about this country, at any given time. I mean, who would write this kind of a thing? Now, the decision you asked about is something which is, in a way, I wouldn't say unusual, but there was a petition on the space that prisoners should have in their cells in the prisons. And it was found out, and nobody basically questioned the facts, that we are in a very low standard compared to not only to OECD countries, but also to third world countries, some of them, which was in a way almost a shame. And we analyzed the legal situation, of course it's all, And the ideology also was, the people in prison are not somebody you want to marry your daughter or to have him on your Friday night dinner, but they are human beings. And they are entitled to human rights, not a five-star hotel, but a reasonable, livable conditions. So our decision was, and it has been partially fulfilled, not fully, partially including here in the Negev, not far from Beersheba, the prisons that are being built, to make sure that these people have a reasonable, and we set the standard, and it's being now worked on. First stage was achieved, and I can't say I was proud of it. You're not proud of decisions, but again, of course, there were three of us, two colleagues of mine, Meltzer and Schwab, and I wrote the main decision. And I chose it for the day I retired, because I think there was a message there, a message of human rights. And again, the prisoners usually don't have a lobby, don't have maybe the public defender works for them, but very little power that is supporting them. So that's one thing. I did mention in that decision, and you asked in your second part of the question, Jewish law. And I'm grateful that you asked this, because in our law is the Knesset law, secular law, with influences from Britain, even from Turkish Ottoman law to an extent. But Jewish law, now it's in the law that if there's no answer elsewhere, you go to the Jewish law. But Jewish law, I look at it as a super inspiration, because I don't think many nations have this voluminous kind of mass of law. The Tanakh, the Bible, Mishnah, that was confidential. Tanakh, Mishnah, the Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Maimonides and the Shulchan Aruch, the codification of Jewish law, the responsa, and the current research, which is very vast. It's a treasure, what's known now as the Jewish book shelf or whatever. We can learn almost in every part of the law, even in areas of the law that didn't exist as such throughout the Talmudic period. You can find some inspiration, even in intellectual property, which is a new concept altogether, and in criminal law, which has stopped in the Jewish history for hundreds of years. And I think it should be encouraged. I know a judge that wants to use Jewish law has first to have some knowledge. Not everybody has, but it's easier today with all the computer data and so on. You can do something about it. B, you need the will. 3, you need the time. Every judge in Israel, we have, and that's, in my view, the best reform that could be done. We have, as far as I know, the number of Israeli judges, and they are good judges and they are hardworking, is 40% of the OECD standard, 40%. If we have about 850 or something judges, if we had 2,000, life would be easier, because people, what does a person on the street, the regular citizen, they don't speak about basic laws and all that. When they submit a claim, they want it to be finished as soon as possible, not schlep or drag on for a long time, because the judge is so busy, and instead of doing another meeting tomorrow, he'll do it in 3 months. And because you see, and you know, you're in the profession. So coming back to Jewish law, it is an inspiration and an important one. and it's culture, not a business. I wrote it in my decision. It is not a business of the religious. It's a business of all of us as Jews, as part of our culture. And that's important to remember, because if you think it's a business of the religious, I'm secular, who cares about all that? No, it's culture.
You wrote a ruling on the evacuation of Gush Katif. You described the mental agony you felt. You wrote, "The decision was also difficult for me to the point of heartbreak and tears." Can you share with us this personal difficulty?
Well, you were referring basically to the decisions on demolishing synagogues. I wasn't involved in the basic decision not to interfere in the government Knesset decision to evacuate, because Miriam, my wife, was here, was involved in as a deputy state attorney, in the compensation preparations. But when the demolition of the synagogues came, it was for me really a heartbreaking, as I said, tears, that Jewish government should demolish synagogues. Who heard about it in history? I mean, we already evacuated before the Gush Katif at the time, and in '82, but in the Sinai settlements, the Sinai settlements. But this time, it came up as a major question. And the chief rabbinate said you can do it under the circumstances, and some other rabbis said no. The question was an evaluation, whether it would, if it stayed there, they would demolish it. The Hamas people, it wasn't Hamas, whoever, the Palestinians will demolish it in their way, whatever it is. I'm always for, understanding with the Palestinians, a better future, better life, but the attitude towards Israeli civilians, by the rockets that are sent here all the time. So if that is the attitude, why should they be nicer to synagogues? And finally, I supported the demolition together with with Justice Beinish at the time, and Justice Levy was in the minority. He didn't say we shouldn't, he said we should have another try. Then there was a request for an additional discussion of that, and I supported it because of the importance of the subject, but it wasn't accepted. I just want to say, I hope no Israeli government would ever have the need and the need to decide whether to, I don't want to speak about evacuation of people, which is, of course, the main thing, but also as Jews, demolishing synagogues.
You wrote 2 rulings on the issue of Orthodox service in Tzahal. What is your position on this issue? Orthodox service in Tzahal.
Well, that's the most difficult question in the relations between the Haredi population and the general population. That's the most difficult question. You can solve relatively easily questions of budgets, questions of even of education, this or the other. But the question of service in the military is a real tough one, because our military is not just, like the British Royal Guard, or any. I just was in Greece, and I saw ours, and British too, and the Greek too maybe, but we are fighting. I mean, our soldiers. I wasn't personally a combat soldier, but my brother was. I lost 2 cousins and friends, of course, in Israeli wars. the notion of serving in the army means also, for many people, endangering their lives. That means that if somebody doesn't take part in it, it's a problem. Now, I can hope that solutions may be found. To be honest, all the legislation that came never had real equality. It had steps towards, and so far it hasn't been finished. There's now a debate going on, and I will not express an opinion on because I don't know the details. But the idea of moving even slowly, and that was what was known as Chok Tal, the Tal law. Tal was a justice, very fine person, justice on the Supreme Court. He headed the committee, and they came up with a law. The law was good, but it wasn't implemented, neither by the army nor by the Haredim. So we had to abolish it years later, which for me was very sad, and I wrote it in my decision. So at the end of the day, the question is the readiness of the Haredi leadership to move forward gradually or somehow. And I'm saying that, and I want to underline, without any disrespect for Torah, for learning Torah. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I learn Torah every day. This is, I didn't know you were going to, but this is the daily Talmud page. And here I have Mishnayot. Like I have in my pocket here the Basic Laws and the Declaration of Independence. So there's no contradiction. And I think that you can be an Orthodox Jew and still be part of the general obligations, commitments of citizens. Of course, you have to understand, we have to understand the special lifestyle of the Haredi population, and we do have respect for them, and every legislation that comes up has respect, and I wrote a lot about the respect for Torah learning and so on, but I don't think there's a contradiction, that's all.
In 2012, at the ceremony of the change of president of the Supreme Court, Judge Salim Gibran chose not to sing the Hatikvah. You supported him. Can you share with us?
Well, first of all, Justice Gibran was my colleague throughout the years. We were appointed the same day, and we retired in a difference of 6 weeks or so. Justice Gibran is a proud Arab, is a proud Christian, and is a proud Israeli. And he served the country for 35 years as a judge in all ranks of the judiciary with great respect. We have friends to this very day. Now, what happened was this. He is a faithful Israeli. He doesn't need my kosher stamp for that. But Hatikvah is not his ethos in the sense of Nefesh Yehudi. He's not a Nefesh Yehudi. So what he used to do is, and he's not the only one, he used to stand respectfully but not sing. And when President Grunis was appointed, we were together and it was on TV, and everybody was singing Hatikvah, and he was not. And so right away, parliamentarians from one side of the aisle, he should resign, he should resign. The next day, I was I gave a public lecture in Jerusalem, and I found it appropriate to say, and I am glad I did it because he was very grateful, and I think it was fair to say that, of course, I know that there are Arab, mainly Druze, but Arab officers in the army that sing Hatikva as a identification with their soldiers. That's very nice. If they can do it, kol hakavod, all respect. But if he is standing and respecting the event, the national anthem, and he's not singing, that's his choice, and one should respect it because and I say it as somebody who is against changing the anthem. I think it has accompanied us all our days of independence, so it should remain the Nefesh Yehudi Omiyah, the Jewish soul, but one should respect this decision by him, and I think that's the answer.
Can they say excuse me, when I was the commander of the Southern Command, I allowed the Bedouin battalion under my command to say in this thing, national anthem, Nefesh Israeli Omiyah. They respected, we respected, and all was good. Then what is the problem?
Well, this is General Samia, who was the commander here, and well, that's creative. I'm saying it with respect. Usually a national anthem, if you want to change something, and it's really creative, but you ought to have a wider decision. I mean, but let me say good luck. And thank you.
Last question. What is your position on the issue of the proposed legal reform about the protest, and what strengths and hope do you still see in the situation?
Well, thank you. This is you have bets enough to have everybody. Well, seriously, well, I have to say first that I'm against. That is, I can't believe that after 55 years in the government service, how 55? Almost 4 years in the army, about 50 years in the service, and then since I retired, I only volunteer, and most of it in government committees and all kinds of, and after all these years that I should go and demonstrate, which I do every week, means that it's really hurting. Now, the Supreme Court is not perfect. Nobody is perfect. But it is a very, very good, serious institution that has been created, and it has respect everywhere abroad. And it serves also as a shield for our soldiers in The Hague or in all kinds of international fora, because what we say is, Hague were created for countries that don't have the rule of law. But we do have the rule of law, and we have a strong judiciary. We don't need you if we have to indict soldiers when they do the wrong thing, which happens all the time. Now again, and I don't think this, what's known as the reform, comes from a positive place. It comes, as I said before, to weaken the court. I don't say that some changes may be done. Personally, I think that the best change would be, as I said before, have more judges and get it more efficient because of that. But as long as we don't have that, because it became such a political problem, I'm supporting the efforts to compromise that are in the president's residence. And I hope, I have two red lines personally. One is the selection committee, the committee that appoints judges and justices throughout the echelon. I was a member of the committee for a number of years. It was, and Rabin used to tell us always, in Hebrew, Mivchan HaTotza'ah, the test of the result. What is the result? The result is a very professional judiciary that has built a tradition. not only the Supreme Court. So, and now what they want to do is to have a political coalition majority in appointing judges. That, in my view, is devastating, and we don't have the time to go to the details, but I think that the idea of today the politicians are there. There are 2 ministers and 2 Knesset members in the committee out of 9. There are 3 justices and 2 bar association people. And they've always reached compromises. There were, in my years in the committee, there were rare cases in which there was a vote. Usually it was a consensus. So, and never, I think, on the Supreme Court. And by the way, they say that Supreme Court brings their friends and so on. In my day, 6 justices to the Supreme Court were appointed. I only knew 1, personally. And Mazuz, in fact, who was my deputy and then became Attorney General. And the other point, in my view, is the legal advisors of the government ministries. Why is that? Because what is now suggested that every minister could bring their own legal advisor. What does it mean? That the opinions would be tailored, can be tailored, for the minister. I'll speak of professionalism. Besides the fact that the people who are working there for years also want to be promoted. Professionalism. This time, the agreement is that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there would be 1 minister for a year, then another for 2 years, and then the first one for the next year. If the government sustained for 4 years, that's the idea. Now, the first one can bring, that's the idea, his legal advisor. Until he will know where the car parking is, he will be out. Then the other one can bring somebody for 2 years. And then when he finishes, the first one can bring either the first one or another one. Where is the professionalism? Where is the integrity and so on? And I don't want to insult anybody, but in my view, it's a disaster. And I speak as somebody who served as legal advisor to 2 ministries, Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I speak from some experience. As we are finishing, I just want to say again, it's a great country with all these things. It's a great opportunity to grow, and I'm glad to be at the Ben-Gurion University, and I'm grateful to the university, and thank you all.